I'm ready to see green sky, green trees. Hello. Welcome to the Community Homeworks Workshop this evening. We are so glad that you're joining us as we were talking about seeing blue skies and green grass. My name is Tiana Harrison, and I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator at Community Homeworks. If you're watching this live, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you would like to join in on the discussion or ask questions, please put that in the comment section as well. If you're watching this after the live broadcast, we're still happy to hear from you. It may take us a little longer to answer your questions. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with a mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our fundings from grants, gifts, and donations. So if you find value in this workshop tonight, we encourage you to donate on our website at communityhomeworks.org. As you know, March is Women's History Month, and we are really, really excited to be celebrating Women in Construction Week, the first week of March. Women in Construction Week, better known as WIC Week, started in 1998 when the National Association of Women in Construction, or NAWIC, wanted to raise awareness and celebrate and recognize women in the industry. Companies usually utilize this week to recognize their female employees and reflect on how they can be an inclusive workplace. Women in Construction Week 2023 marks the 25th year, and I just wanted to celebrate all of the women that are in skilled trades and tell you thank you for your contribution. Tonight's workshop is titled Tools Every Homeowner Should Have, and our instructor once again is the magnificent Mr. Lee Taylor. So thank you so much, Mr. Taylor, for being here. We're looking forward to learning a lot more about tools that every homeowner should have. So one of the things that I enjoy doing here is playing the role of Harriet Homeowner. And as Miss Homeowner, she is a first-time homeowner that is looking to navigate the world of home maintenance and home repair. So Harriet Homeowner is here with the magnificent Mr. Lee Taylor to talk about tools that every homeowner should have. So Mr. Taylor, I just recently bought my home. I'm ready to move in, and I don't have a toolbox or any tools. So I was wondering if you could tell me some of the tools that I need to have, some of their uses, and just the pros and cons of those tools. And so I figured we'd start with hammers for jobs both big and small.
All right. Well, like you said, hammers, all different types of hammers out there. I would say they're broken down by a couple of different styles. Handles, whether they're wood, fiberglass, or metal. The head of the hammer, whether it's a rip claw or a curved claw, and then the hammerhead here as far as what style that is, and then there's other issues that go along with those. And then the weight. The weight is one of those things that really can make a difference. So I'm going to say for your basic, just general home use, usually about a 16-ounce hammer is going to work out just fine. You're not going to be trying to build a house. You're not going to be swinging it all day long. And the reason I say that is that there are other ones out there like this little guy here that you'll pay money for, but the more you use it, the more you'll find out that you don't like it. So, and these small hammers are really, yes, they're good for putting a small nail in and whatnot, but that's about it. So like I said, a 16 ounce, that's what this one is. Light enough to where it's not going to wear you out if you're using it for a longer period of time. Heavy enough to be able to drive those nails and to be able to do the work. It's the weight of the hammer that actually does the bulk of the work. If it's too light, you're going to end up pounding on, let's say you're pounding a nail or something along that line, and you're much more apt to be able to bend that nail over just because you have to hit it so many times because your hammer's so light. So handle and all that sort of stuff, about the only handle style that I would steer clear from is this style right here, which is, it's like a metal pipe with the handle that's just pressed on, and then the head of the hammer is actually just pressed on to that pipe. I've seen that so many times where either the hammer head comes flying off. This pipe is hollow, so it can get bent very easily. And I've also seen it where the grip can slip off of this style. So I would say personally, in my view, I would avoid this style hammer, and you can get this style even in this size, that 16 ounce. The wood, the wood handled or the fiberglass or the straight metal styles, they're all great. There's, all different styles out there. A lot of it is personal. A hammer is one of those, it's a very personal tool. A lot of times people want to, you'll see them in the store and they're grabbing it and they're, doing this sort of thing and stuff. And it, a lot of it does boil down to how does it feel in your hand. If it feels awkward, it's going to be awkward. So it's just a personal style that you would pick. As far as the claw of the hammer, here's a good example. This is what's called a curve claw. You have this part that bends down real hard. This one's not quite a rip. I can get something. This one's not quite a rip. This is a true rip style. That claw comes straight out. This one has a little bit of a curve to it. This one's a little bit better than, say, that, right? Why is that? And I'm not saying this size. You can get a 16 ounce with a straight rip claw like this. That actually, I say, doubles the amount of uses that you can do with that hammer. I've had them where, let's say I'm digging in the yard and I run across, a root or something like that. I can use that and cut right through the thing versus trying to, hook onto it that way. So to me, the rip claw is just more useful in general. As far as, some of the other things on those handles or on the hammers, I would say what you want to avoid for home use is the head of that hammer. So you can see how this is what's called a waffle head. There's a pattern cut into it. This is smooth. Don't buy one of these. That's for framing. The only reason that really is there is if you're having to stretch way out and hit something, it's going to dig into that nail head and not glance off as easily. But for home use, it can sure make a mess of your walls or your trim or something, and you'll end up with that waffle pattern you have to deal with. So flat for home use is what you want.
Mr. Taylor, may I ask you a couple of questions?
Yeah.
There's a couple things that I want to know a little bit more about. What do you mean by a 16 ounce hammer? What does that mean?
The weight.
The weight. And so is it the more the hammer weighs, the more effective and efficient it's going to be?
Yeah. I mean, up to like this one here is probably a 20 ounce. This is a 19 ounce. So yeah, generally the heavier the hammer, the more the easier it's going to be able to drive whatever it is that you're trying to drive in. But wears you out quicker. So that's where that 16 is a nice in between. It's not a big framing hammer, but it's not a little rinky dink. No.
And then how many types of hammers are there?
Yeah, hundreds. Yeah, I mean, there's all different brands and all that sort of stuff, and that's where I'm saying it gets really, very personal as far as how it feels. There are some people that are just like, I stick with, East Wing, or I stick with Plum or whatever. Tons of different manufacturers out there.
And so if that's a claw hammer, what is a ball peen hammer?
Ball peen?
Ball peen.
Yeah, that one is, that's one of those where you have two different style heads on it.
Okay.
You don't have a claw. You don't have a rip claw on it. Is there one in the drawer? Hey, what do you know? Oh, that's a style. Yeah, I mean, you could get something like this. This is a 16 ounce also. And yes, you can use it, but that part right there, very rarely do people actually use in home stuff. So
So it would be better to have the claw on it.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
going to
sir.
be better to have that claw.
Well, we've talked about hammers a little bit.
Yep.
Can you tell me if I need screwdrivers? And if I need screwdrivers, what would I need them for?
I'm going to set this over here. Screwdrivers. Oh, screwdrivers. So yeah, you can get the good old set, like this, where you have a whole bunch of different style and sizes of screwdrivers. Generally, the screws that you're going to encounter most often are Phillips or flat style. And then you have different sizes. So what I mean by that is, and I don't think you can see this on camera, you guys may be able to see this. See how this one's real small versus this one versus one that we don't have here. They're numbered. So what you have is, this is number 1, number 2, and then a much larger one would be a number 3. So most of the time, what you're going to encounter are number 2 Phillips. Occasionally you're going to need number 1. And that's important because if you strip that screw out, it turns into a whole mess, as far as trying to get that screw out or in. But as far as screwdrivers go, yes, you can do this. The reason I personally don't like this is because it takes up so much room. With me, a 6-in-1 or an 8-in-1, something like that, or a 10-in-1 is much easier to deal with. I can flip this around, if I need a flat blade or I need a Phillips, or, number 1, and this is number 2, flat and Phillips. And then also, when I pull these out, I have 2 different nut driver sizes. This
You
size
have
here,
2 different who?
it's called a nut driver. So if you have a hex head style screw or something along that line, you have these 2 different sizes. So this is what a 6-in-1 is. You got 4 here, 2 here. 10 is, some of them have an insert into one of these where you can pull the bit out. It's a much smaller bit, and you have yet another nut size. So the 6-in-1s or the 10-in-1, something like that, usually work out really nice. And they're going to cover just about anything you're going to run into. The other nice thing is if you strip this out, you should be able to go to the store and buy one of these. I actually had an issue where I bought one, and it was from one of the major box stores, and it stripped out. And I took it to the store, and I went, I'm looking for one of these, and they said, well, your hand tool has a warranty. And I said, yeah, I just stripped it out. It just wore out over time. And they said, well, it's still covered under warranty. I was like, okay. And they gave me a whole new one. So I was like, great. So, but yes, you can buy replacement bits for it versus you strip out one of these and it's done. So 6-in-1, 10, 7-in-1s, or, something along that line. About the only thing I would say that with the screwdrivers that you'd want would be a couple of long ones. And the reason for that is sometimes you just need to be able to reach something that you can't reach. Toilets, let's say, you want to tighten up, that tank or something because it's leaking. You could stuff your hand down in that cold water, or you could use a long one and not be frozen, right? So having a couple of long ones, generally just a Phillips. Usually you can get away with just a Phillips. But again, it just kind of depends what you run into. And then the other would be what I call stubbies. A little one like this, just because there are many times where this is not going to fit where you need it. So you have one of these. I don't know. Here's a good question, and I haven't seen one. Maybe you have, Jason. You ever seen a stubby like this in a 6-in-1? That would be a nice thing, wouldn't it? Anyways. So yeah, short one, couple shorts, couple longs, but generally 6-in-1 or something like that's going to take care of most everything you're going to need.
Questions? So we've talked about a hammer, and I know I need a screwdriver.
Yep.
What about a measuring tape?
Oh yeah. Measure once, cut twice.
Measure once, cut twice. Measure twice, cut once.
So yeah, tape measures, generally, what I'm going to say is get about a 25 footer. And I'm going to pick on this little guy right here. Sometimes you may find this is a little 12 footer. The reason I say a 25 footer is this size, it'll do in a pinch. But if you're having to extend it out much more than, say, that, you're going to be fighting it. It really is not that much bigger necessarily, but it is just a lot more useful. So I would say get a 25 footer. You don't need much longer than that. Much shorter is more aggravating than anything. The other is get one that I call these cheaters. You have your inch measurements, your half inch, and all this on this side, but down here it's broken down into your quarters and eighths, sixteenths, and stuff. So it makes it a lot easier to be able to read, especially if you're not used to reading a tape measure. So check them out when you're at the store. And like I said, if you're not used to using one, get one that's split up that way. They sell metric. Not many of us here use metric, so take it for what it's worth. But the other is with tape measures, and we talk about this in the hand tools class also. There's a lock style, and there's a lot of different styles. This one's right on the front, some are on the bottom. But I do want to say that the one thing you want to keep in mind with the tape measure is lock that. You should be able to grab it 2 fingers and you'd still be able to pull that out. There are tape measures out there because there's little teeth in here that press down on this metal, and some of them lock down so hard that you couldn't pull it if you tried. And what that does is kink it, and it ends up failing over time. So that lock should lock it in place, but you still should be able to move it. If it doesn't want to move, don't buy that one. So,
is that what the hook and lock is?
I guess you could call it that.
Okay.
It's hand tools.
Is there a blade in the measuring tape?
A blade?
Mm-hmm. The solid piece attached to the end of the tape measure?
Oh, this?
Do we want to make sure that's curved?
Well, okay. So, yeah. This is, well, even in the stores. Check this, because what can happen is you see this should be a nice 90-degree angle to the blade itself. What can happen, even in the stores, somebody can drop it, and this piece bends down, right? And then all of a sudden your measurements are all, an 1/8 inch off or something along that line, right? So, but if you notice that, let's say you have a tape measure and you notice that it's bent, there's nothing saying you couldn't get one of the other tools and grab it and just gently bend it back so that it's at a 90 degrees again. So, but that's one of those things that, you got to kind of watch out for. Yeah. In the end, like I said, there's lots of varieties. Some that have magnets on them, all sorts of things. The ones that have magnets on them are actually really nice because sometimes you drop something and you need to get it. Like, so, yeah.
So
are there benefits to a metric over an inch one, or is it just personal preference?
That's a personal preference thing to me. I mean, if you're dealing with metric, then yes, I would get one that's metric. But like I said, I don't know how many people are dealing with metric necessarily in home use.
So, Mr. Taylor, now we've talked about hammers and screws and tape measures, and all of those are manual tools.
Yep.
But what if I need something that is a little bit more easy to use? Are there cordless tools that I should have?
There are a lot of cordless tools. We talk about this in power tools class. So this is a brand that's relatively expensive. It's meant for field use and all that sort of stuff. But this is what's called a drill driver. It's the battery operated one. I would say for home use, something like a Ryobi or something like that, the price is much less. The batteries actually work in a multitude of other different tools, from blowers to sawzalls to whatever, right? But your drill driver is one of those tools that is extremely handy. And the reason they call it a drill driver is it has a setting on the side where this is for drilling, so drilling holes or whatever. This is your drive. This is for running screws or anything else along that line. And what that interacts with is this clutch. So you can set the clutch at a low, and what it will do is when it hits that certain amount of resistance, it's going to stop. So you're not overdriving those screws. So you can play around with that clutch and make it so that, let's say you're putting in, so you're changing screw or hinges, and you don't want to over tighten them because they'll strip. You can set it at a low torque, and get it right to where it needs to be, so you can't necessarily overdrive them. This one also, this is a hammer drill also, and that's one of those things you have to watch for when you're buying something along this line. Hammer drill is meant for drilling into concrete. More often than not, usually homeowners aren't getting into that sort of stuff. Now, if you are, you definitely want one that has that hammer feature, but it ups the cost of it. So, and they'll say, sometimes it's just a little symbol, sometimes it'll say hammer drill. So, but that's usually what it's for. And it also has a variable speed. So generally the higher speed is going to be for drilling and whatnot, and the lower speed is going to be for the driving as far as screws and whatnot. So yeah, drill drivers, really nice. If you are buying something like this, what I would suggest is going out and getting one of these bit sets, all different styles of bits. Again, a lot of times this can kind of take the place, sometimes, for the most part, of your screwdriver. So, you can get all different styles of screwdrivers in there, whether they're Phillips or flathead or square or Torx or anything along that line. And then you have your nut drivers in here also. I said this is a small one, but that's one of those things that if you're buying this, you're going to want to buy something like this. And then, whether it's a drill bit set, this is a drill index also, a bit excessive for home use, but they have ones that are about this size where it has the most common styles that you're going to be able to get into. A lot more details on this, but drill drivers are nice.
I have a question. So the main features to look out for when we talk about power tools are, I think, the grip, the voltage, and the speed range switch.
Yeah, so with the voltage, most of them now are 18 volts. That's about normal these days with the lithium batteries. There are some that are, the battery size is one of those things to look at, because even with lithium, even though they're lighter, you have two different sizes. And, a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll hold this and they'll say, it's not bad. And then they throw a battery on it. And it's like, well, so, keep that in mind. Does this make it more powerful? No, it just makes it last longer. So it's a detail to kind of look at when you're shopping for one of those. Grip, yeah, that's one of those things where sometimes it just doesn't feel right in your hand. And, it may be just that you're not used to it, but it just may be that it just doesn't quite fit. So there are a couple of different grip styles. And it's one of those things, generally they have a setup to where you can grab one and, run screws into the piece of wood or whatever that's in the store and play around with it and stuff. But like I said, Ryobi, as far as I'm concerned, for home use, does real good.
Okay. And what's a speed range switch?
That's what this is on the top. So high speed for drilling,
Mm-hmm.
low speed for driving. If you're trying to drive screw in at high speed, you're upping the chance of stripping that screw out. And there are other little details about these that we don't have time to really get into. But yeah, I could talk about this for about an hour. So,
Join us in Power Tools.
yep.
So,
So drill driver is really handy.
unfortunately, though, a wrench couldn't come in a power tool, could it? Do
A
they have power?
wrench?
Mm-hmm. Probably not, right?
Yeah, probably not.
Tell me a little bit more about wrenches then.
All right. So set this guy down. So wrenches are a very generic, very, very generic. A lot of people, when they think of wrenches, they think of this, right? This is one of those. And there's not much wrong with these necessarily. I think the last time I used one of these was like 10 years ago. So they have wrenches like this. They have adjustable wrenches, different sizes, lengths, all sorts of things. And they have what are called slip joint pliers wrenches, like this. So I would say, if you needed a wrench and you didn't want to spend the money on some of these others, fine. Have a pair of these. They will work in a pinch, but the more you use them, the more you're going to find that they're annoying. So a lot of times, a slip wrench like this or an adjustable wrench like this in varying sizes and whatnot can do everything these can do plus. So I will say this. If you buy, it's similar to the hammers. If you go to, let's say, the dollar store or something along that line, and you say, oh, there's a pair of, slip joint pliers like this, and they're super cheap, I'm going to grab those. There's usually a reason. And usually what happens is this part right here, as far as the adjustment goes, sometimes there's a screw or a nut on the back of this, I'm sorry. And what will happen is this starts to fail on you. So when you're holding something, these handles, I can't even make these things barely do it. They slip like this, and that can hurt. And I've learned over the years that I'm going to spend a little bit more money on something like this because it just lasts longer and it's less likely to act up like that. And it usually acts up at the worst possible time. You're holding one, you're trying to do something else, and it decides to. So it's one of those things. The thing with these style pliers, with these slip joint pliers, is they come in different sizes. So they have, little ones. This is about the standard. I have a pair at home that's about that tall, right? And it all boils down to how big you're going to be actually grabbing, so how big of a pipe, a nut, whatever. The thing to think about, though, is if you get, let's say, a smaller one, you have to think about your hand size. And if you're trying to get around something and it's opened up this big and you have small hands like me, it's a bear to get that around. You can't really do it. And you can hold it up here, but you're losing half of your leverage. So sometimes upping that size can actually make the tool a little more useful. But it's just one of those things, people, they'll say, oh, I just want a small one. And then they find themselves in that situation where they're going, I can't grab this thing. So details, but.
So I know that of those that we haven't talked about your favorite tool. So can we spend a little bit of time talking about your favorite?
My favorite. Let's put these over here because make sure we talk about them. So my favorite tool is utility knife. So this is a style that is just a fold-up style. The blade, the little thing right here, and I can change the blade out real easy. I can fold it up, put it in my pocket, or clip it. And it seems silly to say that this is my favorite, but a lot of times I'm trying to do something or whatever. I need a knife. I need to be able to open something up. I use this probably 15 times a day easily versus some of these other tools. So this is one of those. I come from the era when I was 4 years old. My dad gave me, I don't have my knife on me, my dad gave me a pocket knife, and he's like, "It's not a weapon; it's a tool." So, and I learned real fast how not to close it. But yeah, I've been one of those where walk out of the house and I have to have a knife or some kind of knife, and you end up using that more than you think you would. Like I said, this style is nice. There's nothing wrong with other styles that are out there, like these. The only issue I have with these guys is they're big. You can't fold them up. You can't, easily put them in your pouch or something. The other is with this style, you have a screw right here. To be able to change that blade out, you have to take this screw out and it comes apart. And then you open it up and you get the blade in there and you have to put it back together and everything else. And generally it's a pain. And people have a tendency not to change those blades out. And then all of a sudden, your tool is now more of a hazard because that whole thing of a dull knife is a dangerous knife sort of thing. So this style, like I said, I can change that blade out. They do sell these where you can press a button and open these things up and be able to change those blades out much easier. Sometimes it's the button up here where you pull the blade out this way. But if you do get a style like this, make it so that you can change that blade out easy. The other is there are some that are sold where you put the blade in, you don't have that option to be able to retract it like that. And it's just an open utility knife sitting in your toolbox. And the first time you go ratting through that in the dark and you're like doing one of these sort of things, looking for a tool, and you go, yeah, so it's not good. So, yeah. Utility knives. Very
Utility
nice.
knives. Mr. Taylor, tell us a little bit about extension cords. How useful are those?
Useful. So extension cords, like I said, we do live in a wonderful age of cordless. As time goes on, yes, I mean, I'm using less and less extension cords just because of cordless tools. But generally, a decent extension cord for home use is going to be about a 16 gauge. If you're going to be running like chop saws or corded tools off of them, I'm going to say 12 gauge. The lower the number, the more it can deal with, if that makes sense, right? But most of home use are 16 gauge or 14 gauge or something along that line. If you're running power tools, about a 12 gauge, and the cost goes up. The bigger that cord is, or the more that cord can deal with. The other is the length. A lot of people are tempted to get like a 100-footer or 150-footer or something along that line. And, that's great, but it's not great until you start trying to line that thing up. And it turns into just a knotted mess. What I've learned over time is that generally, I'm not going to get usually over a 50-footer. Most of the time, 25 is about right. Now, I mean, and I'm talking running tools and stuff. I'm not talking about running your Christmas lights and whatnot on the other side of the yard or something along that line. It's a totally different thing. But, extension cords are one of those things that, when you need them, you need them. The other thing I would probably say, as far as the outer coating on that, you want one that's rated for exterior. There are some that are not rated for exterior. And the other part is that the coating itself that's covering all those wires comes in different grades. So you can get the cheapest possible one, and it may feel pliable in the store, but as soon as it gets down to low temperatures, nope, it's just and fighting you and everything else. And with age, sometimes that pliability will go away. So a lot of times, if you're paying a little bit more, and let's say you're looking at two 16 gauge cords, right? And they both are the same length, and one is a little bit more than the other. Generally, it boils down to what that coating is. and how well it's going to last. And it's one of those things where unless you fought with an old cord, it's sort of like an old hose. It cracks. It just is grouchy. So, if you find yourself, you think you're going to be needing to use that cord quite a bit, I would go with that little better quality cover on it. It's going to last longer. The other is how you treat it, how you store it, how you wrap it. Generally with extension cords, and there's a whole way to do it. Generally, when I wrap up an extension cord, you'll see people that do this. You don't want to do that. It'll get what's called a memory. And the tighter you wind it, and I've seen people even do it like this, the tighter you wind it, it's going to sit like that. And you go to throw it out, and it's doing one of these sort of things, catching on everything and everything else. As far as I'm concerned, when I wrap mine up, I do about an arm's length and loop it, and then do another arm's length and loop it. And there's tons of variations on this, but what this does is it makes it so that it's not going to necessarily get that memory as far as that twist in it. And then when I'm done, what I'm going to do, I generally just feed it through and plug the male end into itself so that it just doesn't come unraveled when you're hanging it up or something along that line. And it also makes it so that the male end is less likely to get damaged with the prongs and whatnot. We talk about this a lot more, and I talk about this in a lot of other classes too. So,
Hey, Mr. Taylor, I have a question.
Yeah.
There are different options when it comes to extension cords, right? Like light duty, medium duty, heavy duty.
Yep.
What's the difference, and how do I know what I need?
Well, and that's where I was talking about the gauge. So the
gauges.
gauge is what they're talking about. So 12, like I said, 12 gauges are usually a little bigger. You're going to feel that difference. It's going to seem heavier. Yes, it's going to cost more, but it is designed to be able to run motors that pull a lot of amps, right? And it's not going to beat that cord up. What can happen is that if you're trying to run something heavy on a lighter cord, say like a 14 gauge cord, it can start to break down that insulation on that cord and actually turn it crunchy.
Mm-hmm.
There are cords out there where I've grabbed them and bend them like this, and you hear it, and that's the insulation inside cracking and everything else. So generally, I'm going to say for home use, generally about a 16 gauge is about right. The other issue is the length. The longer the cord is, the more it's going to have resistance. So I've seen it where people are using an extension cord and they're maybe 20 feet away from where their outlet is, and they've got a pile of cord sitting on the floor, sitting there heating up because it's just so freaking long. That's why I say generally I don't go past like a 50 footer. 20, me personally, I keep it to around 25 foot. The longer the cord, the more apt it's going to be able to heat up and stuff like that.
What happens when you put two extension cords together?
Well, you would ask that question now. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The only thing that I've had an issue with is you don't want to. So let's say I had a 14 gauge and a 12 gauge, right? I wouldn't want to plug in my 14 gauge into the outlet and then extend it with my 12.
Okay.
I'd want to flip that around.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
So, when you start mismatching them and whatnot, especially if you're putting them under loads, it can mess with things. So
I saw you reaching for that level. Tell us a little bit more about a level, what it does, and how we would use it.
it keeps us all on the level.
That's the best way to hang our wall art.
Yeah. So this is what's technically called a torpedo level. Generally, for home use, like I said, a level like this or a 2-foot level is about right. I have a level at home that's about 8 foot long. Do you need that? Yeah, probably not. So, but generally with a level, what you're going to want to do is you want that level to be as long as possible, if that makes sense, as far as what you're using it for. Let's say I was setting a door and I put this little torpedo level on the side, and it's going to tell me whether it's plumb or not by this here. Is it going to read accurate? Nope. So you want that level to be as close to the length of what it is that you're working on. Generally, like I said, for home use, little one like this or a 2-footer will do just fine. And with that, there are little details on these little torpedo levels. If you look at this, it's got a little V groove in here, and that's designed to be able to go and set, like, say, on a pipe or something like that, and not fall off. Sometimes they have a magnet on it where you can and free up a hand. A lot of hand tools are centered around that. How can they free up your hand so you're not sitting there holding it and trying to do something else? If you've got a magnet in it, great. If it's got a little groove in it where I can set it down, it's not going to roll off, even better. So it boils down to kind of how you're going to be using it. But like I said, torpedo levels or 2-foot for home use is good. Little detail on this. If it's in horizontal like this, we're talking level. If you're plumbing something vertically, that's where this one comes into play. That's called plumb. It's just a pet peeve of mine as far as people will have this and they'll be plumbing something up like this and they'll go, yep, it's level. No, it's not. Well, it is. It's right here. No, it's plumb. Vertical's plumb, horizontal's level. Details. So
I think that yellow thing is a stud finder. Am I right?
Yep, it is. So stud finders are one of those things that are great. Sometimes they can lie. And like I said, there's all different varieties out there. There are even ones out there that will find, like, say, an electrical line versus a water line, or a wooden stud or a metal stud. Some will be able to penetrate deeper into the wall. So let's say you have an older home that has plaster walls with plaster and lath. You may need to get a stud finder that can penetrate deeper into that wall. Some of the cheaper ones, or the less, the ones that are just, your basic, sometimes can't get through that, and they give you a false reading. But like I said, stud finders are nice. I trust them about as far as I can throw them. So what I'll do is, if I'm using one, sure, I'll put it on the wall and I'll run along like this, and it'll beep. You'll see it beep, 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 or something. And I get a little pencil and I put a little mark there. And let's say I'm painting a picture, right? I want to verify that that's actually a stud. So what I'll do is I'll get a small nail or something along that line and tap it in where I know that picture is going to cover that up, just to verify that that is that stud. There are stud finders out there now that are actually horizontal, and they have LED lights. And what it does is you hold it up horizontally and you're moving along, and those lights light up, showing you how wide that stud is, or whatever it is that you're nailing into. So then you go mark, and you're not just glancing the very edge of that stud or whatever it is. So like I said, good as far as trying to find something to be able to attach to.
Well, in order to hang something up, we probably need a ladder or a step ladder, right?
I do.
Can you tell us a little bit about ladders?
I can tell you a lot about ladders. How much do you want to know?
Tell me
How
everything.
much time
you
do
know.
we have?
Tell me everything you got.
Yeah, why? Step ladders. Man, there you go. Why did I not see that hiding over there in the corner? Thanks. I don't know if you can see this on the camera or not. Move my chair. So step ladders, like you said, for home use. One of the first things you want to think about is, this is just a simple step, is the weight rating. So you want to think about not only how much you weigh, but how much you're going to be carrying, because the weight is not just for the person, it's for what that person's carrying. That's the first thing you're going to want to think about. The other is style. whether it's wood, aluminum, or fiberglass. Those are the three basic styles out there. In my personal preference, fiberglass is about the best. It's non-conductive. Wood has a tendency to rot and get slippery and slimy if it's wet, that sort of thing. So, and aluminum has a tendency to electrocute people if they're carrying it around and they come in contact with a power line or something. So, and also too, aluminum, it's lighter, but when those ladders are opened up, and I don't care if it's a 6-footer like this or a little 4-footer step. I've seen it with those aluminum ladders where they will just fold like that. And then you're taking a trip to usually the ER. So I like the fiberglass just because of its durability. And it has flexibility in it and stuff. And its weight, it's not as heavy as a wood ladder. It's not as light as aluminum. It's a nice in between. As far as what size you're going to get, that really boils down to how high you want to get and how tall you are, right? So a lot of people say, I need to get up to my ceiling. Okay, well, you have an 8-foot ceiling, you have a 10-foot ceiling. Are you, 6'6" or are you 5'4", right? The reason I say that is because on any of these step ladders, that step right there is the highest you can go. You're not supposed to step on this, and you're not supposed to stand on this. So you have to keep that in mind. With me, I'm short, so I generally have to get a taller ladder if I have to get up. So keep that in mind as far as how you're going to be using this. Let's say you're going to say, I need to clean my gutters out. Okay, you need to look and see how tall is it, that sort of thing. Am I going to be able to reach it safely and not be stretching and everything else? So the other thing is that they have ladders out there now that are designed where you can use them as a step ladder, and then they may have a thing up here and it opens it up to an extension ladder. I have one at home where I can lower this leg or lower this leg to be able to be on uneven surfaces. There's lots of things you can do. Those are generally a little more expensive, and they're generally a little heavier. But it might be one of those things that you want. The thing with step ladders is they are meant to be just like this. People will buy them and think that they're meant to be leaned up against something, right? I'm not doing it right. Leaned up against something like this. And if that ladder is not specifically designed for that, it is not meant to be like that. So, and this is where maybe getting into one of those ladders that have more functions may be something that's actually right. But generally a 4-foot step, if you're doing just stuff inside and you have just standard 8-foot ceilings or something along that line, it's usually going to be just about right. But step ladders can vary quite a bit. Hopefully that answers your question.
My question.
So
quite a deal. I see that our table is getting smaller, but I see something that's probably really, really important when we talk about tools that homeowners should use, but it's probably really overlooked. Is that PPE equipment that you have right there?
it is. So a lot of people do think that, and they're thinking tools, and they think tools. They don't think of tools as being your safety glasses, your gloves, your hearing protection. I remember when I was younger, I had the old guys telling me you should wear hearing protection, and I was like, and I wish I was listened a little better because my hearing is shot and being around power tools all my life. So yeah, it's one of those things where hearing protection is really good. All different styles out there, from the simple little throwaway, squeeze them, put them in your ear, to put them around your neck, to, the earphones. They have ones out there that where they're form fitted to your ears, but they have holes in them. So when you're having a conversation with somebody, you can hear them. But as soon as something loud goes on, it blocks those decibels. Because again, it's one of those things. A lot of people don't like them because they're having to pull them out to talk to somebody, and they forget to stick them back in, and then what's the use?
Mhm.
So, if you have good hearing, you want to keep good hearing, yeah, I would use that and count it as a tool. The other is gloves. Gloves are one of those things that can be a blessing and can be a curse at the same time. Generally, if you're going to want to get gloves, I say generally leather is what you're going to want, or some form of leather. That's gonna stop the penetrations, the rips, the tears, the cuts, for the most part. Cloth ones, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a little less protection. Sometimes you want gloves, and some people may, when you start getting into this, you may have 3 or 4 different styles of gloves depending on what you're doing. Sometimes they have rubber grippies on them because you're handling something that's slippery or whatever. Great. Sometimes they're set up to where, let's say, glass breaks or something along that line. It's going to be less likely to penetrate that glove. So it just sort of depends. I mean, to have a variety of them for different uses is nothing wrong with that. The other thing is the size. I'll go back to my small hands again. When you put a glove on, you don't want, that much sticking out the end. That is just a flat point that's going to get caught by something. And I'm not going to get into details, but I've told a couple stories about some horror things that I've seen because a power tool grabs that glove. And so, you want that glove to be fitting properly, snug, and not having any loose flaps on it. So I could keep going on gloves, but those are the generals. Safety glasses are one of those other things that I don't know how many times my vision has been saved because something hits it, glances off of it, whatever. The first thing about safety glasses is they have to be safety rated. It'll say Z, and I should know this number. I always forget it. It'll say Z87 on the side, and it's stamped right on there. And that is the impact rating. If you're just using general sunglasses, say, there's nothing saying if you're hammering a nail and it does this sort of thing, it's not going to shatter that glass and get into your eye. So that safety rating is important. That's the first step. The second step is that it is actually comfortable. If you're wearing, if you have a pair that is constantly slipping or just doesn't feel right, they're going to end up on your head more than they're going to end up covering your eyes. If you already wear prescription glasses, you can get, goggles that go over them. But a lot of times they found out that a lot of people don't like that. So they started making them where they will fit over a standard pair of glasses usually. And that may be the case. The other is how well you can see in them. And what I mean by that is a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to buy a pair of safety glasses and I'm doing outside work. So, okay. And they'll go and they'll say, oh, there's a pair of sunglasses that are safety rated. Perfect. Yeah, perfect until you're underneath a cabinet that's dark or you're, in and out. So, like I said, I have a couple of different pairs, a clear pair where I'm inside. I need to be able to see, and I'm not taking them off because I can't see through my sunglasses. And I have a pair of sunglasses that I use outside. So making sure they're comfortable, making sure they're safety rated, and making sure that they work for what condition you're going to be in.
Okay.
So
We have a few more things to cover before we're done.
Okay.
We've talked about a lot of tools, but we haven't talked about the thing that the tool needs, and that's screws.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about screws. And common nails and things of that nature.
Nails and screws. So I was talking about this bit set, right? And I was talking about Torx and flathead and square drive and all that sort of stuff. Generally, it really depends. I mean, generally you're going to run that gamut. as far as, if you're using, let's say, a deck screw that's meant for exterior, meant to go in treated wood, that sort of thing. A lot of them nowadays are what are called Torx, and that's what these guys are. They have like a star that obviously can't really see on there, but they're called Torx. A lot of times they're just hyphenated to T, and then their size is anywhere from the really, really small, like a T10 or something, or a T5, all the way up to like a T35. So the bigger the number, the bigger this is. Those are nice as far as not letting something slip or strip out. But again, it depends on where you live. If you're in an older home, they didn't have all these. They had just general flat blades. So this is why having that variety, or a variety pack like this, and sometimes you can even, we were talking about those 6-in-1s, sometimes you can even be able to slip these in to one of those screwdrivers and be able to use it, in a hand situation versus a drill driver. But as far as the screws go, generally what I'm going to say is that the screws that come with, something like blinds or something along that line are generally going to be the absolute cheapest metal that they could possibly find. And it will, if you look at it wrong, it'll strip out. And it will strip out usually at the worst possible time. So generally when I'm doing something like that, and let's say I'm putting blinds up, and I have to put the brackets in, whether they're over or in the window, I'm going to switch out those screws. I'll usually grab those and put them into the round receptacle next to me, and then have like some other kind of screw that's going to work. So I have a variety of oddball screws in a can or something along that line, because I know that they're not going to strip out on me. They're going to do a little better job as far as not fighting me so much to be able to actually do what they need to be able to do. But yeah, kind of realize that generally if they say, screws are supplied, take it for what it's worth. It's not worth much. So nails, like I said, tons of different nails out there, all different styles, whether they're, used for interior, exterior. You have different sizes. A lot of times they boil down to what's called like a 8D nail, which is used for holding down like sheathing on a roof or a shed, whether it's vertical or the roof. You have 16s, which are meant for framing, like putting things together, that sort of stuff. You have little brad nails that are used for, all. To talk about fasteners is a whole other thing. It's just a ton. Generally, what I'm going to say is if you buy a box, usually, I'm not saying to buy the big box, but I'll usually buy, if you find yourself buying multiple boxes, let's say of the little 1-pound boxes of a specific fastener, you may want to jump up to, say, the 5-pound box, because if you're constantly using them, it doesn't make sense to keep buying them over and over again. The other thing is, don't necessarily get rid of them. This is the pack rat in me, but I have jars, and many times I'm like, I need a certain screw, and I get my jar out and I dump it, and I'm like, there it is right here, instead of going all the way back to the store. So, I mean, it's a personal preference on that, but it is one of those things that saves you many times. So I actually got into a container just the other day that I hadn't gotten into for 15 years, and there it was, exactly what I needed. So.
And so I think that we're almost done. Is there anything else on that table
Yep,
that you wanted to talk to us about?
I'm gonna add a couple things. We got a couple minutes left. Caulk gun, always very nice. All different styles, but definitely a caulk gun. I would say this is what's called a dripless. It has no pressure relief clicker right here. I would say kind of stay away from the old style that has teeth on the bottom. You'd have to turn this. But generally for home use, a dripless style like this is going to work out just fine. A speed square or some kind of a square, and yes, this is a triangle, but they call this a speed square, is one of those things that is extremely handy. It gives you the simple 90-degree, gives you a 45. You could do a bunch of other things with this, but some kind of a square. There's a lot of different styles out there, but generally these are real inexpensive. They're made of plastic. You don't care if they sit outside and get rained on or dropped. They're usually pretty good. So some kind of a square along this line. And the other one is Allen wrenches. So, a lot of times people are buying, you put it together style furnitures, that sort of thing. And again, they say Allen wrench included. Well, that Allen wrench is usually pretty junky. And if you don't put it in there quite right, it's going to strip out. So, like I said, you can buy, generally, there's pros and cons to this. So some people really like a style like this, or it has the most common, and it's all connected in here. And it turns into a handle that I can actually use, get more leverage on and whatnot. But there is one issue. You see a style like this that's generally loose, has this little bend right here that gets it into tighter spaces, versus this is not going to be able to do that. So this is one of those personal preference things. If you buy something like this where it's connected and you're not losing that one that you always need, great. But sometimes you need these L-shaped style Allen wrenches. And like I said, they usually come in standard and metric size. And usually the build your own furniture style stuff is metric. You got room for one more? I want to talk about this is in the power tool class, but this is what's called its generic name is a Sawzall. And what this does is this is a cordless version. This takes a wide variety of blades, their length and what they're designed for. So this one here, this is a real fine tooth. This is for cutting metal. You can buy one of these that's about that long. It's nice and flexible. I can bend it. I can do all sorts of things with it. Then you have wood blades, more aggressive teeth. Again, different lengths and whatnot. You can use what are called brush blades. So we just had an ice storm, and there's tons of down limbs everywhere and everything else. And people are out there with their chainsaws and whatnot, using them for cutting up the limbs. Well, me personally, I just bought a brush blade and put it on there, and I can cut through just about whatever I want. I'm not having to use the chainsaw. I can use my Sawzall. So, let's say I'm digging in the yard again, and I'm trying to get, let's say, a mulberry tree that's been growing up next to my house and causing havoc. And I keep cutting it down, and it keeps growing back. Well, there's nothing saying you can't get a junky wood blade or a brush blade and jam it right down into the dirt and cut those roots out. You can do that with this. This is one of those tools where the more you use it, the more you realize that, gee, this is really handy. So Sawzalls are nice. So, and you can do quite a bit with them. And again, that the whole thing about tools is generally the more you get, the more you realize, the more you want. So it's one of those compounding things, A tool really can make it so that a job can be easy or a job can be extremely frustrating. The right tool for the right job, sort of thing. So.
The right tool for the right job. Mr. Taylor, I want to thank you very, very much for this informative workshop. Like you said, we were learning the right tool for the right job. I thank everyone for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday. Have a good night.
I do. I only want 8 minutes over. Thanks for coming. Thank you. All right.